What if I told you the happiest looking person on your feed right now, the one with the polished smile, the jet-setting lifestyle, the daily affirmations and glittering captions might actually be the loneliest soul in the room? What if behind every smile, there was a whisper of regret, and behind every new beginning, a memory they can't quite erase? That's how it starts. Jake was once your everything. The shared playlists, late-night talks, dreams whispered between tired sighs. Then, just as suddenly as he showed up in your life, he disappeared. No closure, no apology, just silence. You were left staring at the empty side of the bed, rereading conversations like scripture, trying to find the moment when love turned into absence. And now he glows. His face is everywhere, lit by the flicker of city lights in Times Square, framed perfectly beside strangers you've never met, laughing like the heartbreak never happened. He posts about self-love in new chapters, tagging every memory with growth, like he's in a competition for who can heal the fastest, the loudest. But if you look closely, something's off. The photos are perfect, but the energy is frantic. The smile stretches too wide. The captions preach peace, but the eyes, they carry a weight no filter can hide. And deep down you know, because real healing doesn't beg to be seen. Real happiness doesn't shout. It hums, soft, steady, and without applause. What you're witnessing isn't peace, it's performance. See, people often mistake silence for weakness. They think the one who walks away louder is the one who won. But a Stoic knows better. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." You didn't react. You didn't rage. Didn't post cryptic quotes. Didn't try to prove your side. And that silence, that's your power. That's where karma begins. While Jake curates a new persona, desperate to appear untouched, karma doesn't need to make noise. It begins its work in the quiet where no camera reaches, where no applause is heard. It starts when the lights go out, when the notifications stop, when he lies awake and remembers that the person who loved him deepest no longer watches. And that silence, it echoes louder than any goodbye, because true peace doesn't post. It doesn't need to. You see, when someone has to constantly prove how over you they are, they're not. That's not freedom, it's fear wearing makeup. That's not a globe, it's guilt dressed in designer. And while Jake may have walked away from you, he can't outrun the truth. He lost someone who saw him fully, forgave him endlessly, and would have never let him fall alone. But now he must live with the knowledge that he let that person go, and no new relationship, no highlight reel, no retreat to Bali or sound bath in Sedona can drown out the sound of a conscience cracking in the dark. So let them post. Let them sparkle. You don't need to compete with noise when you live in truth. Because while they scream freedom, you've already found yours in silence. And that's just the beginning. Now, let's see where you stand. Quick question for you. Which of these do you believe is a truer sign of healing? A. Silence and stillness that asks for nothing. B. Loud affirmations, public declarations, and constant updates. Drop your answer in the comments, A or B. Let's see who's walking the Stoic path with us. Jake didn't notice the shift at first. That's how karma works. It doesn't knock loudly or announce its arrival with fireworks. It moves like fog, slow and subtle, slipping in under doors and through the cracks of certainty. One day, everything feels familiar. The next, nothing holds the same weight. At first, it was small. The group chat he used to dominate grew quiet around him. Invitations slowed. Friends he thought were permanent stopped checking in. He shrugged it off. People get busy. Life gets hectic. But then came the job opportunity he swore was his. The investor who once called weekly suddenly ghosted. The deals he was counting on dried up. No drama, no explosion, just ... gone. It's not punishment, it's correction. Jake had built his world on assumptions. He assumed he'd always be liked, always be chosen, always have access to support without having to earn it. He thought being charming was enough to keep loyalty. He believed that presence was permanent, and so he took your kindness, your stability, your unwavering belief in him and labeled it as emotional excess. He called you dramatic for caring, needy for showing up too much. But now, those same traits are missing in his life, and nothing feels anchored. This isn't karma striking back. This is life withdrawing what was once freely given. See, the universe doesn't get even. It restores balance. Jake didn't just lose you. He lost the version of himself that was loved at his most vulnerable. And that version that can't be re-downloaded like an app. Once it's gone, it's gone. You were his constant. When he couldn't sleep, it was your voice that grounded him. When he doubted himself, it was your belief that kept him afloat. But he never said thank you. He never admitted how much that meant. Because deep down, he believed you'd never leave. That no matter how much he distanced himself, you'd always return like gravity. But even gravity has limits. You walked away without a grand exit. No drama, just quiet. And that silence, it reverberates now more than any fight ever could. Because you weren't just someone he dated, you were someone who saw his unfiltered self and stayed anyway. That kind of love doesn't come twice. Now, he scrolls through old texts, not for nostalgia, but for proof. Proof that someone once showed up for him completely. That someone once saw his worst and didn't flinch. But rereading those messages only reminds him of what he let slip away while he was busy looking elsewhere. His new connections feel shallow. The laughter doesn't stick. The conversations circle surface-level dreams, never diving into the depths, where real intimacy lives. And the worst part, he's starting to notice. Because the subtraction continues, Jake begins to realize that it's not just you who's missing. It's a series of irreplaceable things. The trust of an old friend, the warmth of unconditional support, the kind of understanding that doesn't require explanation, all gone. And the spaces they used to fill now echo louder than silence itself. He tries to fill them with busier weekends, new hobbies, louder distractions. But subtraction doesn't stop just because you add noise. Karma doesn't care how well you pretend. It only cares that you understand the lesson. And Jake, he's learning. He's learning that kindness is not a guarantee, that support must be reciprocated, that love doesn't stick around when it's ignored. He's learning that what he called overreaction was actually emotional labor, the work of carrying a connection he was too blind to value. And now, the people he surrounds himself with reflect that same blindness. They take, they laugh, they vanish, just like he once did. That's the pattern. That's the quiet subtraction. Not everything is taken at once. Life peels it away, one thread at a time, until the tapestry that once looked perfect begins to unravel. Not even he can deny the holes, and you're no longer there to patch them, because what he mistook for clinginess was actually commitment. What he mocked as softness was actually strength. And now, he understands that the things he thought were replaceable were actually rare. Karma doesn't punish him with chaos. It punishes him with clarity. And every morning he wakes up feeling a little more disconnected. Every night he stares at the ceiling and wonders why things feel less full. That's not bad luck. That's life showing him exactly what he let go. Quietly, consistently. He never says your name. Not out loud. Not to friends, not even to himself. But you're there in the pauses between his sentences, in the way his voice catches when a certain song plays, in the way he stares at a quote a little too long before posting it. Jake pretends you're part of his past, but you never really left. Because when someone has to constantly deny your presence, they're already haunted by it. He uploads a story with a caption that reads, "Some people only realize what they had after they lose it." No tags, no photos of you. But because that language, it's yours. The way he writes it, the rhythm of the regret, it's all too familiar. And what was once a shared heartbeat is now a ghost pulsing through his fingertips. This is the part of karma people never talk about. The mental loops, the quiet obsessions, the way guilt doesn't shout, it whispers. And for someone like Jake, who built walls of performance and distraction, those whispers are deafening in the silence. He tells himself he's over it, that he's moved on, that what you two had wasn't all that deep. But the mind isn't a vault, it's a mirror. And the more he tries to forget you, the more he reflects on the moments he took for granted. That laugh you made when you didn't know he was watching. The time you stayed when he was at his worst. The way your voice softened his anger. Those are memories that no new person can overwrite, no matter how many nights he spends trying. Because forgetting isn't healing, it's avoidance. And avoidance doesn't last. He scrolls through old photos, late at night photos he never deleted, just tucked away. Not because he's sentimental, but because he's afraid to feel what they hold. Sometimes, he almost messages you. The text gets typed, hovered over, and then erased. That invisible tug between pride and apology is his new normal. His posts start changing. Less new beginnings and more vague philosophies about pain, loyalty, and loss. Quotes like, "Some lessons come wrapped in silence," or "Healing means letting go of people who never apologized." You laugh not because it's funny, but because you see it for what it is. A subconscious cry for contact from someone who swore you never mattered. That's how karma speaks. Not in thunder, in code. And the only people who understand that code are the ones who wrote it together. Jake isn't just remembering you. He's being reminded of you by the universe, by his own conscience, by the stark contrast between what he had and what he has now. Every new relationship feels thinner. Every conversation lacks weight. The easy connection he once had with you now feels like a myth, because it wasn't just love, it was understanding. And that's not easy to replicate. People think karma looks like justice in action, but often, it looks like memory in replay. It's the looping thoughts he can't switch off. The way your name sits under his breath when he's drunk. The fact that even when he smiles, something in him aches in, he can't explain why. But you can, because you were the one who lived with intention, who gave without needing to be asked, who showed up, fully, completely, even when he didn't. And now, your absence has become a presence in his life. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. And the irony, he could fix it with one honest conversation, one vulnerable moment. But he won't, because ego is louder than regret. And pride, when worn long enough, becomes armor too heavy to take off. So, he keeps posting, keeps quoting, keeps pretending. But nothing he shares feels whole, because it's not. It's a mosaic of guilt, nostalgia, and unspoken apologies stitched into digital affirmations. And you don't respond. You don't send your own quotes back. You've learned what true power is. It's not proving you're over someone. It's being over them quietly, completely. You recognize the signs now. The obsession masked as inspiration. The sadness behind the healing posts. The truth behind the silence. Jake doesn't talk about you, but he talks around you. And that's all the proof you need. Because when someone can't say your name, but everything else in their life still does, that's karma, and it's already doing its work. Jake used to be open, maybe not emotionally fluent, but at least unguarded. He laughed easily, trusted quickly, and let people in without hesitation. Back then, life felt wide open. There was no fear in intimacy, no second-guessing every word, every glance. But that version of him no longer exists. And the transformation didn't come from someone else hurting him. It came from the slow realization of the harm he caused when he didn't know better or when he didn't care enough to try. Now, he says things like, "I just don't trust people anymore." He frames it as growth, says he's setting boundaries, that he's protecting his peace. But it's not peace, he's guarding its shame. Guilt wears many disguises, and Jake has gotten skilled at wearing the mask of the detached, wise man who's been burned too many times. But no one burned him. What he feels now is the smoke of his own fire, the ash of the bridges he chose to set ablaze. When you see him again briefly, unexpectedly, at a networking event in downtown LA, he barely meets your eyes. He fakes a smile, says a generic hope, "You're doing well," then turns away before either of you can say too much. But that moment, that tiny interaction, says everything. Jake isn't angry, he's not bitter, he's afraid. Because standing in front of you means standing in front of someone who saw who he was before the mask. And nothing terrifies a guilty soul more than recognition. Since losing you, Jake has become suspicious of almost everyone. Not because the world has changed, but because he now sees his own tendencies in other people. He notices every delay in a reply, every subtle shift in tone. He assumes rejection before it arrives. If someone gets close, he pulls away. If someone is too kind, he questions their motives. Because somewhere deep inside, he knows how easy it is to take a gentle heart and twist it, and that knowledge robs him of the ability to believe in sincerity. He didn't just lose you. He lost the ability to receive someone like you again. That's the curse of betrayal, not just being betrayed, but becoming the betrayer. Because when you've hurt someone who loved you with depth and grace, and you never made it right, you start believing that love like that isn't real, or worse, that you don't deserve it anymore. He used to feel in control, the one who dictated when conversations ended, who kept one hand on the escape route. But now, he's in conversations where the other person does the same. People keep him at arm's length, not because they're cruel, but because he exudes distrust. He can't connect, because he's constantly scanning for signs of betrayal. And even when none exist, his mind fills in the blanks. That's the real mirror, when the very behaviors you use to inflict on others start showing up in the people around you. And it's not karma being cruel, it's karma being surgical. Jake has built a life that looks stable, but it's all scaffolding. The foundation is cracked. He's not sure who to trust, but the person he doubts most is himself. And when your inner world fractures like that, no amount of external success can compensate. The nights are the worst, when the noise dies down, when there's nothing left to distract him. That's when the voice creeps in, the one that says, "Maybe I'm the problem." And unlike the other voices in his head, this one sticks, because it's not a question, it's a realization. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Jake now faces the kind of adversity he never saw coming, his own conscience. There are no enemies to point to, no villain in this chapter, just a man looking into the mirror and seeing a reflection, shaped by his own decisions. And the irony, if he had stayed long enough to listen, to learn, to soften, he could have grown with you. But now, every attempt at connection feels like chasing a shadow he reaches, but it pulls away. And he tells himself he's protecting his heart. But what he's really doing is punishing himself. Because that's what karma does when it works internally. It doesn't destroy, it erodes. It peels away the comfort of self-delusion until only the truth remains. And Jake's truth, he can't trust others, because deep down, he knows exactly what he's capable of, and that knowledge has become his prison, quiet, invisible, and completely self-made. Jake thought it was fate when he met her. Her name was Ava, and she lit up a room with the kind of energy that made people lean in. It was at a rooftop event in Miami, string lights overhead, music humming low in the background, the air heavy with the illusion of something about to happen. She was magnetic, unapologetically confident, and knew how to keep people on their toes. Jake was drawn to her the way moths race toward light recklessly, without question. At first it felt like a second chance, like the universe had finally handed him someone who could match his intensity, someone who wouldn't crumble under pressure but rise with it. Their conversations were electric, the kind of chemistry that makes you believe you've found a kindred spirit. He told his friends he hadn't felt this connected in years, but slowly, something shifted. Ava was affectionate when it suited her. She texted back instantly until she didn't. She showered him with attention, then disappeared for days. Jake found himself overanalyzing everything. He'd wait for her replies with a phone in hand, refreshing the screen like a man searching for oxygen. He replayed their last conversations, wondering if he said too much or not enough. He asked for clarity, and she called him too much. He tried to be vulnerable, and she laughed it off like he was being dramatic. It hit him in pieces, like rain seeping through a roof he didn't know was leaking. The first drop was confusion, then came anxiety, then a quiet, growing dread. Because the things she was doing, the hot and cold affection, the shifting energy, the sense that he was always chasing something just out of reach, they weren't unfamiliar. They were familiar. Painfully so. It was what he used to do. It was the exact game he once played with someone who loved him without conditions. He had created this pattern once, and now, for the first time, he was on the receiving end. And it wasn't just uncomfortable. It was excruciating. He remembered the look in your eyes when you tried to make sense of his emotional withdrawal. He remembered how you gave and gave, even when he gave less and less. How he accused you of being clingy when all you wanted was honesty. And now, here he was sitting with the same uncertainty, fighting the same invisible storm, trying to decode someone who refused to be understood. This wasn't a bad match. This was Karma's most intimate lesson, reflection. Ava wasn't cruel. She wasn't malicious. She was simply him. Not the version he tried to portray to the world, but the one he hid. She was the mirror, held steadily by the universe, forcing him to confront the reality of who he'd once been. At first, he justified her behavior, said she was just complicated, misunderstood, that she had layers. But as the cycle continued, those justifications turned hollow. Because deep down, a whisper started forming, a thought he couldn't ignore. This is what I did to someone who didn't deserve it. The realization didn't come with drama. It didn't knock him over. It settled in like dust, clinging to everything, until he couldn't ignore it anymore. Every cold shoulder from Ava felt like a replay of what he'd done to you. Every unmet need, every vague excuse, every dismissive shrug, it all mirrored what he once gave so carelessly. And he couldn't fix it. Not because he didn't try, but because this time, he wasn't in control. Karma doesn't always come crashing through the door. Sometimes, it dresses up like love. Sometimes, it looks like a lesson wearing lipstick and confidence. And when it arrives, it doesn't demand apology. It demands awareness. Jake couldn't outrun this one. No distraction worked. No rationalization soothed it. Because karma didn't come to destroy him. It came to teach him, to show him, with precision and poetic symmetry, what it feels like to be on the other side of his own behavior. The worst part, he couldn't even be mad, because somewhere inside, he knew he'd earned this. That's the beauty and brutality of reflection. It doesn't just show you what you lost, it shows you why. And Ava, she wasn't his enemy. She was the moment everything came full circle. There's no revenge in Stoicism. There's only recognition. You don't need to chase justice when life already knows how to balance itself. And Jake, he's now living inside the answer to a question he never thought to ask. Not, why did this happen to me? But what did I once do that allowed this to happen through me? And that question, that mirror, will follow him far longer than any heartbreak ever could. There comes a point where you stop looking back, not because the past didn't shape you, but because you finally outgrew the space where pain used to live. That's where you are now. Not healed in some Instagram perfect, motivational quote kind of way, but grounded, real, whole in the places that used to be hollow. Not because someone came to fix you, but because you finally learned how to sit with yourself long enough to remember who you were before the heartbreak. There were days when the silence Jake left behind felt unbearable, when you questioned everything: your worth, your instincts, your heart. But you didn't chase closure. You didn't need him to come back and tell you he was wrong. You chose a different path, a quieter one. You started building yourself piece by piece, and not for revenge, not for validation, but for peace. It started small: a morning walk without checking your phone, a journal entry that wasn't about him, a dinner where you laughed not because you were trying to seem okay, but because for a moment, you actually were. You signed up for a workshop in Austin on Stoic philosophy, not because you wanted answers, but because you wanted better questions. Questions that led you back to yourself. From there, things shifted, not in loud cinematic ways, but in subtle shifts only you could feel. You stopped measuring your progress by whether or not he noticed. You stopped writing your worth in someone else's voice. You stopped needing the world to confirm what you now know in your bones. Peace is not something you find, it's something you become. When Jake thinks of you, no, and he does, it's not with the same arrogance he once carried. It's with a strange mix of curiosity and regret. He watches from a distance. He might never say it, but he knows he lost access to something irreplaceable. Not because you vanished, but because you elevated. You didn't just move on, you transcended. He'll try to find versions of you in other people: your loyalty, your warmth, your way of seeing someone's soul before their surface. But what he won't find is your energy, your presence, the way you made chaos feel like home. That was never something he could recreate, because it wasn't about what you gave. It was about who you were when you gave it, and that version of you, he no longer gets to know. You've grown into someone who doesn't need to be understood to be complete. Someone who doesn't argue with ghosts or explain truth to those who twisted it. You no longer waste energy trying to prove your side of the story. You let the silence speak, and it does, with a voice louder than blame, clearer than closure. Now, you hike through Zion National Park alone, not to escape the past, but to celebrate your own strength. You sit with the quiet and feel no emptiness. You look at the sky and no longer ask, why me? You ask, what now? And the answer keeps unfolding in the simplest ways. A conversation that makes you feel seen. A moment of stillness that feels like safety. A morning where your first thought isn't about pain, but about potential. You are no longer the person who was waiting. You are the one who is becoming. And Jake, he may still be performing, still posting, still chasing versions of connection that feel real for a moment and then dissolve. Because what he's truly chasing is peace. The kind you found. The kind he forfeited. The kind that can't be earned through performance, but only through transformation. That's the karma he never expected. Not punishment, not disaster, but watching someone he once dismissed become the version of themselves that he never imagined, and realizing he doesn't get to witness it up close. And you don't need revenge. You don't need him to hurt the way you once did. Because the greatest form of justice isn't seeing them suffer. It's seeing yourself rise so far above the storm that they become a distant, quiet memory in the rearview mirror of a life well lived. That's the real power. That's the Stoic way. You don't curse those who wronged you. You don't chase ghosts for apologies. You don't try to rewrite the ending. You write a better story. And in that story, you're not just healed, you're free. Jake's story wasn't one of chaos or revenge. It was a quiet unfolding, a slow, deliberate unraveling of the life he once believed was unshakable. He started off on top, confident, adored, and seemingly untouchable, but through a series of choices driven by pride, ego, and emotional negligence, he lost something rare, someone who loved him not for what he could offer, but simply for who he was. In the beginning, it looked like he was winning. He walked away, without looking back, while the person he left behind, the one who had stayed up late comforting him, who saw his rawest fears and still chose him, was left to pick up the pieces. But what he didn't realize was that walking away doesn't always mean moving forward. Sometimes it means you're heading deeper into the parts of yourself that you haven't healed. Jake tried to drown the guilt with noise, new people, new posts, new distractions. But karma doesn't knock loudly. It enters through silence. And slowly, it began taking away the things he didn't know were fragile. Trust, peace, connection. It didn't take his career or his home. It took his clarity. It took his ease. And most of all, it took the version of himself that could have grown into something greater if only he'd stayed. If only he'd listened. The person he once took for granted didn't beg him to come back. They chose to heal, not to hurt him but to save themselves. And in that healing, they became unreachable. Not out of pride, but because real growth doesn't stay in places that no longer honor its value. Jake tried to replace what he lost. He found someone new, someone who mirrored his own past behavior. At first it felt like magic, then it felt like punishment. Because what he used to do to others was now being done to him, and it didn't feel like power anymore. It felt like powerlessness, and all the while, the one who had once wept in silence rose not with bitterness, but with grace. They stopped needing closure, stopped chasing understanding. They stepped fully into themselves. They read books that rebuilt their mind. They hiked mountains that restored their faith. They surrounded themselves with people who mirrored their depth, not their wounds. That's what karma really looks like. Not lightning bolts or instant payback, but deep, irreversible transformation. Not just of the one who hurt you, but of the one who chose not to become bitter from being hurt. The lesson here is simple, but powerful. Pain doesn't make you weak, but how you respond to it defines your future. You can either become the mirror of the one who broke you or become the proof that pain doesn't get the final say. Jake didn't lose because he walked away. He lost because he never returned to himself, because he never apologized to the version of himself that betrayed someone kind. He never made peace with the choices that fractured his integrity and the person he hurt. They won not by retaliating, but by refusing to become like him. In today's world, we're taught to clap back, to expose, to get revenge. But the Stoic path whispers something different. It teaches us that silence is not weakness, that peace is not passivity, that true strength is the ability to keep your dignity while the world tries to pull you into war. So how do you apply this in your own life? You pause before reacting. You ask yourself, will this make me proud of the person I'm becoming? You protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. And when someone shows you who they are through manipulation, betrayal, or carelessness, you observe. You don't collapse. You don't chase. You evolve. You build your life so intentionally, so rooted in clarity and character, that even those who hurt you one day have to sit with the echo of your absence. And not out of cruelty, but because your presence once brought a softness they didn't know how to hold. And that's the most beautiful kind of justice. Now, I want to hear from you. What part of Jake's story resonated the most with you? Do you believe karma works silently through self-awareness and emotional consequence? Or do you think justice needs to be visible to be real? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to read what this brought up for you. And if this message spoke to your heart, subscribe to Stoic Living Guide. Every week, we go beyond the noise, bringing you grounded stories, real truths, and the tools to build peace that no one can steal from you. Because here, we don't just talk healing, we live it quietly, powerfully, unapologetically.